All right, we are excited to have another episode of the Arise podcast. And today we are having actually Adrian Faber, who initiated this podcast. He is kind of the guy that taught me how to do these things. So we're very thankful to have him back on the Arise podcast. So
Well,
welcome,
yeah.
Adrian.
Thank you so much for having me. It's fun to be back on the podcast and do this again with you. It was awesome having the space that we did this before. You and I think, had interviewed a number of guests and talked and had some episodes as well. And it's great to be back.
Yeah, good. But I know that in your absence, God has done some amazing things
hmm
with your own life and for the church and for others. So we really would love to hear what God has been doing with you
Okay.
and for you. So why don't you just catch us up to speed,
Yes.
what's been going on in your life and what you're doing now?
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, I stepped into pursuing a full-time work in working as a therapist. So, working as a psychotherapist and pursuing my accreditation, getting all of my hours, doing more full-time work in that environment. And God has blessed me, and I've been able to be doing that over the past at least 7 months or so, a little bit more than that, 8, 9 months. And it's been really wonderful. So I work as a registered psychotherapist. I'm qualifying, but I'm going through that process of dropping that qualifying now because I passed all my things, but I can't quite drop that quite yet. But yeah, I've been working in a few different agencies. One of those is at the Christian Counseling Center, which is in Burlington. And they have me as like a resident therapist at a local high school as well. And then a few days of the week, I work at an office in Brantford as well, a counseling office that I got connected to in there. And I really love working with a variety of people, like a lot of the diversity of clients that I meet with. Early in my career, I'm gaining experience and learning about people, learning about myself and what I'm passionate about and where I see God working. And so right now, I'm kind of just saying yes to everything, like want to do all the experiences, want to meet with everyone, all the types of clients and everything. And I'm sure over time, I'll kind of like narrow down and find my niche.
Mhm.
But for now, it's been really fun and exciting to be exploring these different avenues, asking these questions. How does this work in that environment? What factors are all there, So I kind of feel like I'm a little bit of, yeah, almost like a sponge in a way that I'm trying to just soak everything in.
Yeah. Okay, but
But
delve into that. What do you mean
yeah.
by diversity? Is it diversity in age? Is it
hmm
circumstances, situations? Is it Christian, non-Christian? What is the
Yeah.
diversity?
Yeah, a little bit of everything. So one would be age. It's interesting because I reflect on it happened a few weeks in a row that I saw one client who was, like teenage, and then another is like an elderly person and
Okay.
different genders and stuff as well, right? And so I switched from one to the other very quickly. And then it's interesting learning about like the human nature, human experience and
Mm,
human experiences and what's similar across those areas and what
mm,
isn't similar.
mm.
Because also like, age is one, gender is another, and like workforce would be another, and religion and spirituality would be another, right? And so some clients are Christian, some clients are non-Christian, and um, at the office in Brantford that I work at, the agency has some contracts with like the local school board or with
Okay.
like, police officers will come in because they'll get support through their employment to be able to come for therapy. And so it's very interesting then working with people from those different work environments,
Yeah.
with their own background, of their own
Yeah.
stories and everything, right? So I get to see a bunch of that diversity and also understand, okay, what are the similarities in terms of who people are,
Yeah.
right? Because we're all humans. And
So
so,
tell us
really
what
interesting.
similarities are you seeing between the 15-year-old and the cop that's
Yeah.
coming in?
Well, I think one big question that's always helpful for me to think of is like, well, in a way, is like, what are the developmental needs of the
Mm,
person who's in front of me, right?
mm,
And so, and that's true for everyone. Like for myself too, that's a helpful reflection to have of like, at this point in my life, what is it that I'm longing for? What is it that I'm searching for? Because at different stages, of a person's growth and maturity, those developmental needs will come out in different ways, right? And so, like for someone for like myself in my age bracket, young adult, right? Developing responsibilities, gaining independence, separate, like moving on and branching out into the world, financial independence, and those kind of things are some of those huge pushes, right?
yeah.
That sometimes like those are very biological and those are emotional and social and spiritual as well. So
Mhm.
all of those things kind of come into those questions when it comes to like, okay, what are the needs here?
Mhm.
So some of those core human needs, right, of
Mhm.
being known, of being
Mhm.
loved,
Mhm.
of being heard, of
Mhm.
having attachment, right? Those kind of words. I think
Yeah.
those are ones that you can kind of see as are God given, as God created, in the Garden of Eden. Those would be some classic core human needs. But then those needs are also like contextualized within the developmental stages that each person is at. So
Mhm.
it's interesting then kind of reflecting on that of like someone on the earlier side of their life is more asking like, how do I have independence? Who am I? What are my identities? What am I working through and all that? Whereas on the other side, it's more of like, how do I encourage and teach and grow the younger generations? And how do I pass on? And how do I love and care for people? And then reflections of my own life. How have I lived my life? What have all those kind of things can kind of come into play, right?
Yeah. Well, and I
Very,
imagine even just this, the state of our world and the state of our sinful mind, that you also have people my age in their 50s that are still asking those questions.
mhm.
How am I loved? Where do I belong? And seeking those because of a disorientation somewhere in my life, or even a change in circumstance and so on. So we're all looking, to be loved
Yeah.
in some way, and some of those things change. So I'm curious though, what age group are you working with the most?
I would say it is more like teens and young adults.
Okay.
That's the age group that I tend to work with the most. I don't really have any like limitations. As I mentioned earlier, I'm just kind of
Yeah.
saying yes to
Yeah.
working
Good for
in
you.
every area as I'm gaining experience.
Mhm.
But I do kind of find it is teens and young adults. That's
Mhm.
both within, the different agencies that I do work with, and then also the high school that I'm at too.
Mhm.
I have an
Mhm.
opportunity to work with
Mhm.
teens in that area. So
I'm curious though, like as you are working with different ages, there must be this little, part of you that you're seeing things in the adults where you kind of want to take care of some of the things with those teens so
mhm,
that they're not going to deal with them with the adults. And that
mhm,
when you're working with the adults, seeing some replications of situations that you're seeing with the teens, that you want to help them, you know, take care of that because
mhm.
it's something that maybe, could become worse if it's not worked through, or
Yeah,
in their
absolutely.
identity or whatever else, right? If they haven't figured that out, as a 50-year-old or whatever else, but
Yeah.
it's changing. So interesting. So tell me, the teens are coming to you. What are
Yeah.
they coming with? And are they the Christians? Are they all Christians, or are they also from the Brantford one? So tell me what teens are coming to see you for.
Yeah, all sorts of different stuff, right? And yeah, I do see teens from all sorts of backgrounds. And if I see them coming from in the offices that I work at as well, they'll come from different high schools as well, right? And so work with teens from a number of different high schools and family backgrounds. Yeah, there's a lot of things, right? Connected to that question of identity, like
Mm-hmm.
who am I?
Mm-hmm.
What am I doing? How do I function, right? Because then that's also understanding like what
Mm-hmm.
are my stresses that I have? What's the
Mm-hmm.
family that I come from? Who am I? What do I like to do? And what are the challenges for me even being able to do things? And another one as well, actually, which is crossing my mind is like teens who come because their parents say that it's a good thing,
Oh,
right?
okay.
And so
Yeah.
that's another aspect
Yeah.
where parents will say, "Oh, therapy is good. You should go for therapy." And then the teens are in the room and you have to be a little creative and then okay, what are we doing? What are we working
Yeah.
on? And
Yeah.
what are we
Yeah.
talking about here? And so there is a lot of those things. And it's interesting, right? Because I like what you kind of touched on too of teens are coming in and you can see how like challenging challenges in their functioning or their behavior or stress management or relationships you can understand. And in my mind, it's like you can see the potentials of where that could go within their relationships or families in the future. And I guess on one hand, like it's just amazing that they're there. That work that they do have of reflection of themselves and how they are doing is a massive part in terms of setting themselves up well for the future. And so that self-reflection, things that they say, talking things through, going to speak to someone about it as a teenager, I think is a really valuable thing to do. So their own reflection is a lot of that work that they're already setting themselves up well for in the future. It's
So,
great.
so you did touch on though that, some are the parents say they should go,
Yeah.
right? So, and I get that. And I think that that's a caring parent that is,
Hmm.
has some concerns about the child and even just wants the child to have a comfort level that it's okay to receive help from someone else for your
Mhm.
circumstance. I think that's a beautiful thing. But at the same time, and you said this, they're going to come with, okay, my mom told me to come here,
Yeah.
right? It's going to be a barrier a little bit or a different circumstance than if a child is like, I want to go and get help,
Hmm.
right? So what do you do in those different circumstances where the child is ready, and wants to talk about what they're struggling with, and then the child that is just like, I'm supposed to come here?
And that's part of the dance of being in the therapy room, right? Like for me, I never know who's coming into the room or where their heart's at or what they're looking to work on. So one big aspect that I appreciate about some of the earlier sessions that people might expect for when they do go in for therapy is setting goals. Like how is it that this will be helpful for you? What is it that you're hoping that at the end of this session you will be better off than before you came in, right? Or what does this mean to you? Or even in your different dynamics, your things that you're dealing with, like what is it that you're longing for? Where are you going? And then kind of giving some of that like creative measure in that direction that they're going towards. Like, let's talk about what even that is. And so setting goals is one of those primary things to do within a therapy context. And so that will look different for everyone, right? And so for someone who's coming in well prepared and thinking, yeah, I want to work through this, or this is a clear problem I see in my life.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk that through. But then if they come in and it's more like, well, my parents told me to, or my friend told me to come, or I'm kind of just here, or I see these problems, but I don't know if I'm ready, or
Yeah.
even if they're in that dance, right? It's a little bit of that space of just, okay, let's be open to that.
Yeah.
And then let's talk about like how this will best be useful
Mm.
for them.
Mm.
And this also kind of goes back to like setting themselves up well and for in the future, right? And it's like you can kind of like you can tell people, you can say you should be a loving person or you should do this, but those questions are lived through, right? Of like identity, like even like those developmental needs, right? Of developing responsibility, gaining a sense of your own identity, and independence, and all that. Those are like questions that people live through and growth stages that they live through, right? And so part of that process is even just for me as a therapist being present with
Mm.
young people through that kind of space, even if it is my mom told me to come,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And part of that too is also celebrating like this is amazing that you don't have these things kind of going on that are problems for you. What are you good at? What are you excelling at? What are your strengths and how can you grow those things? And even like you can just say like let's do some exploratory work. Let's talk about a whole bunch of different things and see if something comes up. And if not, that's okay. And
Yeah.
you kind of just have to hold space for wherever people are at in that.
Yeah. I just love what you're saying. So, Arise is positioned to strengthen the church, care for its members. So hearing what you're saying now, is there a space for the church to encourage young people to find healthy ways to work through some of these questions? Is it always through a therapist or through a counselor or is there something that you're seeing now with these young people that can be done in the church to help them work through that? Like, because of the development of social media and the huge world out there being brought into people's lives and in their homes in close proximity, we know that there's a different kind of communication that's happening,
Yeah.
right? So are you seeing something that can happen within the church now, either amongst the young adults or from leadership or within families, to strengthen them in some way to support the questions that they are bringing to you, Adrian?
It's a really good question, Hildy.
I
It's a
hope you have
great
an answer.
question to live through, right? And like, I think having like framing and creating beautiful questions to live through and work through are really like amazing things, right? And so I think that's a great question to be asking churches and to be working through. So it's a great question. And I think 100%, right? Like the more people that kind of can be involved in someone's life and the more space in terms of people's like circles of their communities, of family, of individual, of church, of broader communities that can be involved in those questions and working through them, the better, right? That can lead to those lasting changes and community changes and seeing the kingdom of God at work through transforming individuals and communities, right? Um, so absolutely, I think that there's a space for that. So a few different ways of how to do that.
Yeah.
One of those, like, kind of connected to the like developmental needs of young adults, right? Teenagers is even just a question of like, how can the teen or young adult like achieve having his or her own voice, and how can they learn to make independent decisions, right? And like I think that's one question to ask of how can you support a young adult or teenager through achieving their developmental needs in a um, yeah, in a framework that works well within their families and individuals through that spiritual lens as well, I think is one way to kind of go through that. And then it's more about like asking those questions, right?
Mhm.
How can we do this? How can they achieve their own voice? How can they grow into their independence? What are they growing into? Like asking that and working through with that is, I think, very beneficial
Yeah.
because it's also then how are you listening to them? Like, are
Oh,
you
love
hearing
it.
them and
I
are you
love it.
doing something about it?
Yeah.
Because sometimes, right, we can listen to someone and say, well, that's not a great idea, or you should do this, or you
Yeah.
should do that. Whereas if there's a young adult who's trying to gain their own voice and independence and autonomy and
Mm,
growth and
mm,
responsibility and all that, and then
mm,
they say, oh, I really want to do
mm,
X or Y, right? Or I'm interested in something. And
mm,
then their response is that they're not being heard or not being
mm,
listened to through how it goes.
mm,
That can feel very invalidating, right? And kind of
mm,
shut that down. And then,
mm.
um,
Oh, I think
oh,
that's amazing. We need to be better listeners, and we need to
mm,
work on our listening skills. And even, I've walked with a couple of young adults who get very frustrated that
mhm,
older, in particular Christian adults, have dumbed them down.
mm,
Right? So if
mm,
we can validate that each of the young adults are created in the image of God, that they have value, that God loves them now, right?
mm,
And is training them to be church leaders and instruments in his hand in his kingdom, if we can have that lens of
mhm,
Christ upon these young adults,
mhm.
why would we not hold them up and listen and
Yeah.
encourage them and spur them on in the faith and in their walk and who they
Mhm,
are, right? Than having this opinion that they're always on their screens and they're like we have this perspective, unfortunately, from society, I guess.
mhm.
But I think that, like you, yeah, that
Yeah.
listening of and giving them that value that the
Mhm.
Lord gives to them as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Amazing. That's great. And you mentioned screens, which I think is very interesting and a good conversation point to kind of have as well, right? Like even the question of like, why are young people on screens or like, why are they on phones, right? And if you kind of come into that with a perspective of just phones are bad, right? Then
Yeah.
that can kind of be a lens that you look through in terms of like setting rules and setting boundaries and communication and stuff. And that also has effect in terms of how are you listening well to the teenagers,
Mm,
right?
mm.
And that's also not to say that phones aren't bad,
Yeah,
that
yeah,
social media like is not bad,
yes.
but it's also a little bit more of opening the conversation and opening the question of, well, like they're gathering in that space and
Yeah.
they're communing with each other through those environments and they're interested in things and they have
Mm,
opportunities to grow and learn and be
mm,
involved in tech and be very
mm,
creative and it
mm,
achieves those things.
mm,
So then if we kind of come in with a right rod of like it's bad, it's wrong, then
mm,
that kind of dictates how we
mm,
can converse, right, with young
mm,
adults and teenagers.
mm, mm,
And it's a complicated discussion as well,
mm,
right, because of effects of social media and technology and all of that. So it's not quick and dry, but kind of why I raise it is more of like asking the questions and moving
yeah.
into that space and
Mm,
how to help young adults and teens through their developmental needs and what they're trying to achieve and working towards while also being instructive and
mm,
mindful within a church community.
mm. Yeah, so talk deeper. What do you do? How are you helping these young adults? And what would you encourage even just a layperson in the pews in how to respond to some of these struggles that they're dealing with?
First, just asking the questions,
Okay.
like even knowing what, like when kids are on their phones, what are they doing on their
Yeah.
phones,
Yeah.
right? What are they interested in, and who do they talk to, and what are they looking at, and what are they watching, and why are they watching it? What are they interested in?
Yeah.
Doing those kind of things, right? And kind of invites a little bit of that conversation to know some of the space of what's happening in the modern age and era, right?
Mhm.
Because we also see like with young like teenagers as seeing the like such an excitement and passion for the Lord and such an excitement and passion for
Mhm.
what God is doing in their
Mhm.
lives and in their
Mhm.
relationships and like a very like passionate and like emotionally attuned while also pursuing like both right and left brain,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Christianity and seeing that happen. And then like I think asking those questions and kind of leaning into it helps get to a bit of that root of how do you encourage and, work from the ground up.
Yeah.
Um, I think, another piece, one thing that was very like formational for me in my life was learning about like incarnational ministry, right? And one book that I read was Geography of Grace by Joel Van Dyke and Chris Rock, who were missionaries in Latin America. But that idea of a geography of grace is that grace pools at the lowest areas, and then kind of grows and works up. And so understanding where's the Holy Spirit, like in all of these spaces, and like
Mm-hmm.
where's God in social media? What is He doing in these areas? Like you open yourself up to that and ask those questions of what could be going on, then it allows for more of that space, right, of interacting with it rather than coming in with your own, I don't know, preconceived notions or ideas about what it is.
So, in saying that, Adrian, do you kind of have a framework that you work through? Like I've been to counseling
Mm,
myself before, and some of them have, some of the people that I see have kind of, Hildy, you're going to come. This is kind of the framework that I work
mhm,
with, and how we're going to work through the struggles that you're dealing with. Do you
mhm.
have that, Adrian? Or I know you're still learning and curious and have your
Yeah,
hands
yeah,
open
yeah.
to the Lord to learn, but are you working towards something like that, that because you're seeing now a commonality in people's hearts and, working with their identity, but also the modalities that you've learned, are
Mhm.
you finding kind of creating a framework?
I love the question.
Okay.
Well, I love talking about this stuff, so it's great. It gives me an opportunity to talk about it. So, one thing that I appreciate because I went through the route of becoming a psychotherapist, like a registered psychotherapist with the board of the like CRPO, the College of Registered Psychotherapists of Ontario. And so part of what that means is going through that standard of practice as a psychotherapist, which also means like applying modalities, right? Research-based, evidence-based modalities within the practice that I do. And then as a therapist within the environments and contexts that I work with, that involves then doing that work. One thing that I appreciate about a lot of the modalities, or some of the modalities, I'll say, is that they allow for space of application within the context of the worldview of the therapist. Well, in some way, right? It kind of like, and part of that is saying that, like, as therapists, we don't impose or have biases for our own beliefs to guide or to um, yeah, kind of impose our own worldview on clients that we meet with, right? And so, what am I getting to? What I'm getting to is that I'm kind of learning and working through applying those modalities in different ways. One thing I'll say too is that when I was at Tyndale studying in this, a cool idea that I was in Sue Elfeld's class was bringing up this idea of us as therapists are transitional grace objects. Maybe you've heard that term
Okay.
before,
Yeah.
but we're,
Yeah.
transitional grace objects. And
Well,
so
it's a process of sanctification.
yeah, exactly. Right. And so part of that is like, um, we ourselves as therapists are not the ones who, have the authority to speak into someone's life or to kind of bring that down on an authoritarian sort of level. But it's more of recognizing that like Jesus is the place that we start with, and this is as a worldview and background of, how I
As a
maybe
Christian.
work as a
Yeah.
therapist. But that we're separate from our clients, but we also want to see the experience of the clients from the inside. And so asking those questions through curiosity, and not crossing any boundaries, respecting boundaries and fostering that independence in people, right? And being aware of what our responsibility is and what belongs to the client, what belongs to God, and kind of recognizing that space. So that's a helpful kind of lens that I have
Yeah.
as well. And so you have those worldview perspectives that you will bring in as a therapist, but then in the application of the modalities within therapy, that will look differently. And
Yeah.
so one that I've been into recently is a modality called ACT, which is
Okay.
acceptance and commitment therapy.
Okay.
And that's one that I've really been enjoying recently. But part of like the different modalities is you try on different hats in a way because they'll have their own perspectives and ideas of how to work through things, and different clients will sometimes require different modalities that you use. Some is a little eclectic, whereas some is more specific that you try on this one hat of acceptance and commitment therapy or something, and then you kind of move
Yeah,
forward.
that's so beautiful. So you're seeing each client as
Mhm.
an individual in the eyes of the Lord, right?
Yeah.
We are all
Yeah.
created uniquely. And yes, there are questions that we all need to be responding to. We need to understand
Mhm.
who we are in Christ. And yet we are all created with different experiences, different genetics, and then, different like trauma or
Yes.
things that we have to respond to in that way that we have to be careful with. So what I hear from you is you're really working with each individual situation, each
Hmm.
individual person as an image bearer,
Yes.
right? And honoring that. And at the same time, you're honoring that God has to do the work.
Hmm.
Jesus needs to touch the heart, right? And you're giving that space, correct me if I'm wrong, for that person to understand what, I guess with the Christians differently, of course, than non-Christians, but
Okay.
for Christ to do that work, to open up the
Hmm.
space. And I commend you for that, Adrian,
Hmm.
because I, my heart is for people to see Christ as soon as
Hmm.
possible,
Hmm.
because that's where transformation happens. But what I
Hmm.
hear you doing is really listening and guiding them and then pointing them to truth ultimately. I know I'm using different terminology than the a therapist would, but am I correct in that? Like, is that kind of what you're opening up their heart to see who they are, to see the
Hmm.
world around
Yeah.
them, to see who God is, to see how they're created, and then, opening that space for them to see what God's doing in their heart to transform them to reflect Him wholly?
Yeah, there's also a level of that myself as a therapist has a certain perspective, right? An understanding of what is truth and what is worldview and what
Yeah,
does this look like. And
yeah,
I have to be aware and intentional about what my own worldview is and what I believe about what's happening, right? In the counseling room and
yeah.
everything. And also recognize the autonomy and independence of the clients that I work with as well, because one aspect of ACT is talking about values, like um, having value-based decisions and value-based actions that you take. And so part of that means let's talk about your values. What do you value in life? What's most important to you? Who's most important to you? What does this look like? And then how are you taking actions towards getting to that point? And why is that important, right? And so you can kind of imagine how for Christians that will fit into a specific environment, right? But then also for non-Christians, there's also a like recognizing and talking about values and living those value-based actions will look differently
Yeah,
depending on who people are, but that's part of that like contextual aspect, right, of
yeah,
therapy that you're kind of mentioning of
yeah.
working with people as individuals in the room, seeing
I,
them as individuals.
yeah, this is great because this is even helping me walk
Hmm.
alongside young adults, right? You're giving me tools through this to, ask the right questions. But I even think that that is the core of the root of our sin is because we have
Hmm.
disordered loves, right? The
Yeah.
values are messed up. So asking them what their values are would be
Hmm.
so valuable.
Absolutely, right?
Yeah,
And that's important too to kind of because then like if you ask what are your values, what do you care about? What are you focused on and what are you working towards? And like rather than it just being like Jesus, right?
yeah,
It kind of breaks it down a little bit more of like,
yeah,
well, where you're at in life, who are you and
yeah,
what are the important things that you're working towards and how can you set up behaviors and actions and decisions in your life that are helping you pursue the values that you do have and
yeah,
what are some of the barriers to that that you're noticing in your life?
yeah,
Like, what's holding you back from being able to achieve the things that you want to, right? And so for young adults, teenagers, social pressure, right? Like judgment from parents, from family, from friends, from all these kind of things, like those are those are all there, right? And so kind of then asking
and
those
even
questions.
if they're real or they're felt, they're
Yeah.
there. And I really appreciate because all this ties into everything you've been saying since the beginning. So even about social media or
Mhm.
about getting to know, it's all about that listening factor. And then through that listening, you're building a connection that
Yeah.
you value them. And there's a trust built then so that when you do need to guide them or do need to give them some support somewhere, you've built that trust because you show
Yeah.
value to them and who they are.
Yeah.
Adrian, you're
Yeah.
doing some incredible
Oh.
things this summer. I'm just going to tie into
Yes.
something
Yeah.
else.
Yeah.
What are
Yeah.
you doing this summer?
Yeah, so in the summer that I'm not at the high school, school's off for a couple months, and so one thing that we're doing at Christian Counseling Center is hosting kids groups. So groups for children age 9 through 12, which are psychoeducational by nature, and also involved kids coming. So I work alongside Stephanie, who is the um, works primarily with kids at CCC, and so I've been working with her through a 4 week, um, yeah, group psychoeducation for kids, and so they come and we talk about emotions, talk about anger, anxiety, communication, and conflict, and how to work through things. Just this past week, we had our art therapy intern come into one of those sessions as well, and she led us through somatic exercise of breathing and connecting with the body, and then also drawing part of fleshing out like a nourishing tree of what benefits us, what grows us, what are our fruits, and led through a art therapy exercise, which was really, really cool.
Okay.
So one thing that I like about the Christian Counseling Center is that there's an opportunity to be involved in hosting some of those groups or workshops or being part of Christian communities when it does come to um, some of the space between mental health and the church spirituality. And I think you've talked before with other people that work at Christian Counseling Center too. So having some of that, yeah, just thinking of different resources, right? And being part of this conversation on mental health and support and resources
Yeah.
for church members and church leaders and bridging that gap, right?
Yeah.
That you've
So,
kind of been
so
noticing.
are all they're all Christians then, I'm assuming. And
Mhm.
how do they learn about this? Do you call it a camp?
Well, it's funny. We don't call it a camp, but
Okay.
people in my family
Oh,
say to me, calling it kids camp. But um, no, so we just advertise within churches. So we advertised to churches that were hosting this, posted on social media, and shared it around with some people that we were connected to in the community. And then they could sign their kids up for it. This is the first year that
oh,
we've
that
done
was my
it.
next question. Is this the first year you're doing it? And what has
Yes.
been the response so far?
Yeah, it's been a good response. We're just kind of it's one of those things that we're just starting out and doing, right? But then we'll kind of reflect and understand what went well and what didn't, or what can we do better next time. And
Yeah.
I hope that we can do it again in the future. But it was great for this first year to do it.
So how many weeks did you do it and how many hours per day?
Yeah, so we do 4 weeks, four
Okay.
weeks in a row,
Okay.
and then it'll be like a Tuesday morning from 9:30 to 11.
Okay.
Um, that kids will come for about an hour and a half. It's not
Okay.
very long, but it's that time to have some psychoeducation, some connection, some discussion, ask some questions, and that's good.
So the same children are coming every Tuesday for 4 weeks. I
Yeah,
gotcha. Okay.
yeah,
It's not a full week
that's right.
session
Yeah,
then. So
just
is this something you're hoping to continue through the school year as well in some capacity, or is it not?
I think that we'll probably do it more in the summer.
Okay.
So we'll see what happens, but I could see it happening again next summer.
Yeah, sounds great. So
Yeah.
what else are you doing, Adrian?
I'm being involved with that and doing some work in that. And so one of those has been talking about resiliency, actually, with the high school that I was working with, talking about resiliency in students and how can students understand that. And for teachers and leaders, how can we encourage resiliency for youth and teenagers?
You have
And
to define resiliency though, because that can be taken a different way,
mhm.
different contexts. So,
Yeah, that's right. So, in my understanding of working through it, one that I'm kind of picking up from an idea from ACT, which I really love this idea of psychological flexibility. And so, having psychological flexibility allows us to open up and recognize, the challenging things and why we're doing things and what's going on, and be flexible enough to understand our own thoughts and emotions and be able to continue through towards doing what matters,
mm,
even when we're experiencing uncomfortable things. And
mm.
so resiliency is connected to that too, right? Of like, can I push through and do what matters to me, even with having these uncomfortable things happen? Um, so that's kind of part of my understanding of resiliency. But as you said, there's churches that are
I'm
interested
very curious how that would respond because I'm actually thinking of a number of people who have felt pressure to continue in things that are hard,
in
right?
that.
But then it's figuring out whether it's actually wrong to continue, right?
Hmm.
It's too hard for who you are, or it's not the right place for you.
Yeah.
And when is the time to push through some of the things that you're struggling with? So that's a big conversation. Like resiliency is sounds great. Yes, we're building resilient people, but you also need to take into account, the circumstances
Yeah.
and the character. Yeah, do you touch on that as well? Because we're
There's
not all
one.
meant to do the same thing.
No,
where
that's
right,
right.
and we compare way too often, and
Hmm.
we don't necessarily keep our eyes fixed on Jesus. We keep our eye fixed on what the
Hmm.
person's thinking of us.
Yeah.
So that resiliency can be so tender
Yes.
and
Yeah.
tough.
And a part of the question for that, for this, like, and again, this is coming from ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, because I've kind of been wearing that hat recently. But part of the question is like, who's driving the bus? If you're on a bus and a whole bunch of passengers on board, right? Of maybe a little bit of your resentment, a little bit of that like
Mm,
challenge of just doing a hard thing.
mm,
Which person is in the driver's seat in terms of making the decision, and where is it that the bus is going, right? And
mm.
so those are questions to ask.
Beautiful. Love
And
that.
it's also not about avoidance, right? Of like, it's about recognizing and
Yeah.
accepting what are my struggles. And this is hard for me. Why is this hard for me? What is it that I'm doing? And if I do decide to step off or change direction of the bus, is it my own resentment or my own something else
Yeah.
that's kind
Yeah.
of getting in the driver's seat? Or is it me making a decision based off of what's important to me?
Yeah.
And so that's kind of why it's opening up a little bit, right? And
Yeah.
making a value-based decision
Mhm,
rather than
mhm,
being hooked by our own thoughts
mhm.
or other things.
Yeah, no, that's great. That I'm actually thinking of the book Good to Great, where it talks about the bus analogy as well. But even just, perseverance develops character, and we know that through our trials, Christ strengthens us. So
Yeah.
even, all of that is building character.
Yes.
I
Yeah.
think that we should always be refining. We should always be asking those questions so that we do come closer to Christ's heart in that space and understand how we respond with his heart to others,
Mhm.
right? And we are like we have bodies that
Mhm.
science understands and works through, and then we have the Bible. So
Mhm.
intersecting those is very closely knit. But yet,
Mhm.
how do we wrestle with and how do we respond with clarity to the people that are seeking
Yes.
support? Now, what would you say, Adrian, would be some good tips for the church to wrestle through that? Right? If
Mhm.
if I, as a parishioner, go to one of my leaders and say, I'd like to see a Christian counselor, and my friend comes and says, I'd like to get therapy from a secular because I don't believe that the Christians know it as well. And another one comes and says, I believe biblical counseling is the only way to go. What would
Mhm.
you encourage churches right now
Mhm.
to how should they respond to those people?
One way would be through like inviting more of the question, I think. Like if people are coming and looking for support, there's something going on, that they're looking for support in. And I think encouraging the fact that they're reaching out for help and wanting to do that, I think encouraging that and supporting them in however that they can is a good place to start. And even asking some of those questions then, right? Like if someone is going to go to a therapist or a counselor in which someone from the church has some questions about or is concerned about, then they could invite further conversation with that person of, tell me a bit more about why you're going to that person versus this person. Can we understand this? What does this look like? And then, depending on the church and their leadership, they'll make a decision in terms of how best to come alongside as a church to support. But I think, like, again, asking more questions and coming from that space of, like, are you hearing what's happening? And how can you actively listen to the person who's coming with those kind of things, right? Um,
Well,
because yeah,
and
go
I
ahead.
and imagine that some of the questions can be responded by some of the problems or the struggles that the person is dealing with could also be dealt with within the church
Mhm.
as well, right? So I really appreciate you saying, asking the questions. Just to finish this off, just a couple
Yeah,
of questions that I kind of ask
yeah,
everyone is,
yeah.
where do you have hope for the church? From the
Mhm.
circumstances and the situations that you are seeing and experiencing and preparing for, where do you have hope for the church to grow in their understanding and support for people that are struggling in different ways?
Mhm. I think that I have hope for the church in Jesus Christ. Like I would say, I don't know if it's a
Yeah,
full
okay,
answer.
Jesus.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's just the Jesus answer,
yeah,
right? But
yeah.
like, oh, but everything kind of comes back to like to the person of Jesus through like his incarnation, who came to be with us, right? And so that's part of the mission of the church as well, to as part of that incarnational ministry, to be with people, right? And to be with that idea that Jesus is with us, that we receive from him
Mhm.
and empowered by him, and that the movement of the church comes through the Holy Spirit, that it's not up to us, but it's up to God's work and what he's doing,
Mhm.
is more about us being present and aware in terms of where the Spirit is working. Like Grace Pool is in the lowest area, like that
Yeah.
idea of
Yeah.
recognizing where is God in these
Yeah.
spaces and what is he doing, because he is active and he is doing things. And so hope is then found in his work that he is already present in.
Yeah.
Um, and so I would say that kind of like hope for the church is in awareness and recognition of that incarnation, that Jesus is with us. And so then leaning into that and understanding that is
Mhm.
that space to go for. So
Mhm.
that's a Sunday school answer.
Yeah.
Another one is kind of that I do think it's true that young adults, teenagers are having that like passionate and excited encounter with God that's like stirring up their excitement to be involved within these spaces in new ways, which is awesome.
Yeah. And we should harbor that as much as
Yeah.
possible, like open the opportunities for them with that excitement. And even just, you talked about, Christ with us. That's
Mhm.
also a call for us to be with others as
Mhm.
Christ came to be with his people, right? And that is also going to be a strengthening of the church. Another one I love to ask, and I can't wait to hear your answer. I don't know if you prepared for this, but what are some good resources, in particular
Mhm.
for young adults, that we can provide to the church to strengthen their understanding of who Christ is and where their identity is, but also to help them walk through and work through some of the circumstances that they are struggling with?
Mhm. That is a really good question. So yeah, so maybe some podcast recommendations that have been helpful for me in my life. Again, these are recommendations from me. I don't endorse everything that is said in all of these podcasts, but have been really helpful for me. Is a podcast, Being Human, the place we find ourselves.
Okay.
And another one which I've come across recently is called Attached to God, which is about neuroscience and attachment and within spiritual formation. And so that's been one that I've kind of been picking a few episodes here and there from recently, which has been really helpful. And some books. Um, I don't know if these would be as geared towards like teenagers or young adults. For them, like I don't know, C.S. Lewis,
Mhm.
Thomas Merton, Henry Nouwen are some amazing authors, I think, for that age group. But for me as well, like this book that was written by one of my mentors actually was Geography of Grace by
Okay.
Phil Van Dyke and Chris Rock, was very helpful in recognizing it, the subtitle there is Doing Theology from Below. And so
Okay.
grassroots efforts, it was really amazing. Another one that was really helpful for me is Prophetic Imagination by Walter Brueggemann. It was a very good book in understanding what is it that God's doing and how can we be involved in like um, part of our task as Christians is to give voice and put voice in terms of like what is happening in our lives and in the world, in a real way through arts and media and everything. Prophetic imagination was a really helpful one for me as well. So those are some podcasts and books.
Yeah, that's very
There's
helpful.
another.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no, that's great. And if there's others, you can email them to us and we'll put them in the show
Sure.
notes,
Yeah.
as well. So Adrian, like as a young adult, and I heard this, or as a parent, and I'm hearing you speak, and I'm like, I'd love to go and see you.
Yeah.
What would you recommend? Is that through the CCC?
Yeah,
Best avenue?
so on the Christian Counseling website, people can go on christiancounselingcenter.ca and they can look at there's different titles there and they can find a therapist. And then the different therapists will be listed on there and they can find someone that is a good match for them. My name is on there as well. And then you can just book through there online, or you can call the Christian Counseling Center and talk to Sandy and she can help set up an appointment as well.
Love it, love it. Is
Yeah.
there one last word that you would like to give to the church to encourage them in their love for one another, and for, if you want, for youth specifically? I know that you walk
Mhm.
alongside of others, but
Yeah, well, the one on my mind now, and this is something that's very prevalent in my work, right? But is beautiful questions bring beautiful answers. And so that idea of asking beautiful questions and sitting in that space of not necessarily having an answer, but working through it is a way that kind of that pursues that, right? That's part of the incarnational ministry, like Jesus who had said, like, who is it that you say that I am? he asked that question, or what is it you want me to do? You know?
Mhm.
And so those questions are so, Jesus asked so many questions, right, in the Gospels. And
Yes.
part of like ministry as a church is about asking the questions, living through the questions, and engage in involved activities through those questions. So I think that would be one encouragement, right? Is
Yeah.
just opening up, asking questions, pursuing um, what
Yeah.
God is doing and where He's working.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. And you said it. That's the way Jesus walked too.
Mhm.
And Jesus knew the answers before he asked the questions. He knew the heart of every
Mhm.
man and woman that he was speaking with, but him asking questions allowed them to be seen and to be known. I think
Mhm.
of the woman at the well, right, where he's like, "I know you don't have a husband," right? Like, so just some of those things where, but he
Yes,
still invited her in
that's
and
right.
asked her questions. Will you give me a cup of water? And those kind of things is really
Yeah,
modeling Christ. So bless
yeah.
you. Thank you,
Good.
Adrian, for
Yeah,
this
thank you so
time.
much for
And
having me.
yeah, and I pray that God will continue to use you well. And I'm very excited to even hear kind of what God's going to continue to reveal to you as you are sitting with your hands and your heart open to all
Mhm.
these different people that are coming, to sit in the chair with you
Mhm.
to seek out, resolve for the struggles that are in their hearts and in their minds and in their bodies even.
Mhm.
And may God bless you even as you navigate the presentations that you are preparing
Yeah.
to strengthen the church and to build into the church and to ask more questions and to provide more conversations so that we can better strengthen our church's care for all of Christ's beautiful
Mhm.
bride. So,
Amazing.
yeah,
Wow,
bless
thank you
you,
so much.
Adrian.
Thanks for having me.